Level up. How to make a day and night system like a boss.
So the first thing we're going to do here is jump over to our GDevelop interface. This is what we are going to be making. We're going to be making a day and night system, which counts minutes, hours, and day count. You can see that that's working there. And as we transition into daytime and nighttime, our screen will get brighter and get darker. And I'm going to let this run for a second so you can see what this project does. Once we hit that time, the sun starts to set. The day changes, and it begins to grow into daylight. And once it's at daylight, it'll stay this maximum brightness until it's time for the sun to set. And this way we can keep track of days. This can be incorporated into a bunch of different systems, but I'm going to show you a very sound way of designing the system. This is pretty robust, although simple. It allows you to integrate this into all sorts of tools for your game. Maybe in your game you want to do something like Stardew Valley, and you want to keep track of growth rate for plants, or maybe monsters come out at night. The game difficulty changes. Maybe there's a wave counter based on your days. This is a great way of doing that. So now that you see what the project looks like, here's the code. This is everything we're going to be doing. Pretty straightforward. I just want to show everybody what it looks like before we do it. That way, if anybody wants to just see that right away, they could copy this and skip the tutorial. All right. So now we're going to do this ourselves. So we're going to just remove everything. And we're going to start from the beginning. All right. So after we create a project inside of GDevelop, going to create a project, all I have done is select the desktop mobile version, made sure that the optimize for pixel art is selected, and we've disabled the allow players to authenticate in game. Right now, that isn't relevant to what we're doing, so we can just generate off of that. Once you are in your new game, we want to create. Let me delete these. Well, we can go ahead and create new layers by going down here and adding a layer. Name the first one lighting, and the second one UI. Both of them, they'll all start unhidden, and that's fine. We're going to keep it like that for now. And now that we have all of our layers, you can grab them and move them like such if you need to. It is important that UI is on top, lighting is the second one, and base layer is the bottom. So the first things we're going to do is add a sprite. We're going to name this daylight, and we're going to add an animation. Now that we have an animation, we're going to click create with Piskel, which is the in-game or the in-engine pixel art editor. All we're going to do is click B, or click on the bucket or press B, and fill it to black. It should automatically be like that. Yours might look a little bit different. Maybe it's stretched out a little bit more, but B for bucket, click to fill, save. We don't need to name it anything. This could be left blank. It doesn't matter. And press apply. The next thing that we need is a text. And here we're going to name this debug text. How you write it is irrelevant. Just keep it consistent as you work on this project. So now that we have the two things that we need, we can go over to our event sheet and we can get started. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is if you right click up here on the add new event, we can add it a event group. This is a way for us to keep organized and make this just visually appealing and yeah, organized. So time cycle is what we're going to be naming this section. In the time cycle, the first thing that we want to do is so at the beginning of our scene, come on. At the beginning. Okay. At the beginning of the scene, we want to create scene variables. Now, this system isn't based off of real life time. although we are using real seconds to count, we will be creating our game so that our day and night cycle is roughly 20 minutes. But I'll show you along the way how you can make it to real life time. So the first thing we're going to do is add an action. We're going to type variable, and we need a number variable. It's important that we click scene or global. I'm going to be doing this in scene, so if you want to follow along directly, you can do it this way. So where you need a number variable, and we're going to call it ticks. When you go to add your variables, you won't have this, and I'll show you how to add variables here in just a second. But we're going to set this to 0. So once you have ticks set, I want to show you very quickly. If you go into your scene, you right click on it and go to open scene properties. You can go to edit scene variables, and you can add your variables here. Now, GDevelop doesn't require you to do this if you would like to just add them in your events. However, if you want them to appear in the drop-down menu, you will have to add them in the scene. So here we have ticks, minutes, hours, and day count. If you wanted this to be based off of real life, you could add seconds, and I'll show you how you can incorporate that in real time here. So now that we have our ticks set to 0, we want to copy and paste this 4 times. And for our system, we're going to use minutes, hours, and we want a day count. Because we don't start on a 0 day, we generally have a number. We're going to start with 1 on the day count value. At the beginning of the scene, something that we also need to do is first we need to go to our lighting layer. We can click on layers here and drag our daylight in. And this seems weird. Why is daylight black? Well, I'll show you here in a second. But all you have to do is drag this over. It can be quite a bit over. It doesn't really matter. Just stretch it over the viewport. This is what the camera should be seeing. And now when we press preview, there should just be a black screen. And there it is, black screen. So now what we want to do is validate that this is on the lighting layer, which it is. Now we're going to click on the UI layer, and we're going to drag this text box up here into the UI layer. Now, what we can do is edit the base and make sure we set the color to white. So that way we can see what's on our page. We can just stretch that and make that a little bit bigger just so we can have more to click on. Now that we have added the daylight to this layer, what I want you to do is go back down to the layer section, click back on base just to set anything you drag back onto the base layer, and go to lighting and hide the layer. Once you click off of that layer, you won't be able to select that daylight because it's being hidden, and we don't need to interface with it any further than this. So that's all we need. So now we're going to go into our events, and we're going to change the opacity of daylight. So daylight opacity set to the max value that we're going to want our daylight to be, our nighttime to be in this, which is 200. At 255, because opacity is how full an object is. We have transparency and we have opacity. So the higher the value, the more opaque something becomes. You can't see through it. If it is transparent or translucent, 0, when there's no opacity to it. So when at 0, we can't see anything. Or there's a lack of that completely. So at 200, we get a good balance of darkness. You could change it to whatever you would like, but this is what the value we're using here. So we're going to be setting our max, or right now we're setting the daylight to what we plan on being the max darkness. And now we want to also, at the beginning of the scene, show the layer of lighting. And now whenever we run our scene, we will see the black being generated at a darker value. So it's gray now. And now we can see the text. If we didn't do this, if we remove this, and we hid the scene and then launched our previewer, it would be white this time, as we can see here. So it's important that we just Control Z to bring back our lighting. The next thing we want to do, if we click on time cycle, one of the hotkeys is Shift D. The other thing you could do is just click add a new event. But we are going to add a blank event, and there is no condition to trigger this, so this should always be happening. We want to change that debug text so that we can see what's happening in real time. So what we need to do, because this it is a text, it is expecting a string, which means that we need to put it in quotes. And to begin this, we want to say ticks and add a space at the end. So that way, because it is a string, it'll add that space into what we're doing. Now we need to get a variable. So we type variable, and we need it to be passed in as a string. So we say variable string. If you did assign the initial values as global values and not as scene values, then you will need to use global variable string. But we need to pass in ticks. So that way, every time there is a tick and it changes, we can see the text. And right now, because we've already added minutes and hours, we can go plus sign. Every time we want to add something to this extension of what we're writing in the text box, we have to do a plus sign. And now we want to do new line, which is a built-in feature into GDevelop to create a new line in our text. So now in the first line, it'll say ticks, followed by the number of ticks, the count, and then underneath it now is a new line. We're going to add plus, and we're going to do minutes. And it's important that we spell all of this correctly. The things that these are strings, and it's not as important there. However, when we take our variable string, it needs, what we pass into here needs to be minutes spelled correctly, or it won't actually pass in any number, which that would not be good. We don't want that. So avoid that. So we're just going to continue to do this for every variable. So now we have hours, and we want to add a space, make sure that there's that space there. Variable string hours, and we'll do a new line. And in that new line, we're going to do day count. Day count. Oops, I forgot to add the quotes. Day count and plus variable string day count. Gotta make sure all the capitalization, whatever you wrote it as, capitalized, it all matters. So there we go. So now we can press OK, and we should see those values that we had printed available there. It's we need to increase the size of our text box. If that happens to you, just increase the size of your text box. And now our text will not get jumbled up. So nothing's counting yet, and it's dark, but we have some printing progress. So that's all we're going to have to do for our debug text. Now we can go on to add the next event. So up here we can right click, add event group. We're going to drag it down, and it comes after the time cycle. And honestly, I think we should rename this to Initialize time. Now that we've initialized the time, we can move on to the next feature of that, which is setting the time scale. So when we start, we're going to create a new event underneath it, Shift D. And this doesn't need a condition. We want this to happen. We want it to wait exactly 1 second, roughly. And so we want to do 1 times time delta. And the reason why we do times delta, because in GDevelop, the max frame rate is 60. And 60 is roughly a second in ticks, essentially, in time delta. So every time we want to count a second basically as a frame. So we multiply by our frames to make sure if we just did one, if our graphics card glitched, excuse me, or something like that, our time might get messed up. And we want to be in perfect synchronization with the server or with the information that's being passed to us. So time delta. I'm sure that there's a better way to explain that, but hopefully that makes sense. Just remember, at this scale, because we're calculating in time, we want to base it off our frames. So now we want to add a condition to every time this tick happens. We want to add. We can copy this, change the scene variable of ticks, and we don't want to set it. We want to go add 1. So every time this happens, I'll show you now when we run our script. Every time this happens, we'll see our ticks are just counting up. Excellent. So now we have this updating system that lets us know how much time has passed. So now what we want to do is underneath this, again, Shift D, we need to go one more layer down, and we need to check the variables of tick. So tick is the base of our time element. How many ticks are happening in a second? Now I'm going to base the system that we're developing off of the Minecraft system, which Minecraft uses roughly 20 ticks a second. I think it is 20 ticks a second, to determine they set the pace of all of their game, at least the growth mechanics of trees and things like that, what happens in the game by these ticks, right? How many ticks have passed, and then adjust the plant growth or something like that. So we could set it to real time, and I can show you how to do that. But we're going to start with getting the number variable of our scene, because we're using a scene, and we're going to get the ticks. And when so if we were basing this off Minecraft, the Minecraft days and the day cycle is roughly, I want to say it's 20 minutes or 24 minutes. I think it's 20 minutes because they only have a 20-hour period in their game. We're going to be using the 24-hour period as though it is real time. And so we're going to want to set this to roughly 0.05. So 80 milliseconds? No, what's the... I'm bad at math. So don't worry about it. So basically, if our ticks are greater than or equal to 20, we want that to trigger a change in our minutes. So what we're going to do is copy this, paste it, go to minutes, and we want to add 1. So now every time, or we're gonna basically, I'll just run the script. Let's look at it. So now our minutes are going up rapidly because every time over 20, our minutes are calculating at an insane rate. That's not going to work for us, so we need to do something called modulation. To modulate something, we take one value and we weigh the difference between another value. That means nothing to you unless you know code, and if you don't, then that will probably mean nothing to you. So what we need to do is do mod, is how we call that function modulation. You might see modulation in other languages with a percentage sign, and it might be one value percentage another sign. And so what we want to do is do a mod, and we want to check the variable of ticks. So this is getting the number of ticks as it currently is, and we're capping it. We're checking the current number to what the max value is. The max value is going to be 20 because we set that value here. So what happens now is every time the ticks gets to 20 because of this, set it back to the beginning. 20 is the max, 0 is the beginning, because that's what we're checking. And then now, every time we hit 20, we'll get 1 minute. And this is a little bit faster than a second, But we can see that if we had replaced minutes with seconds, we'd be pretty close, nearly, to a beat of 1 every second. So now we have a time value that's moving pretty quickly. Now we can roll that over into the next scene. So we can copy and paste this whole section, just Control C, Control V, or you can copy paste that way with a right click. You can copy one of these things and paste them in here, whatever you want to do. Just make sure it looks like this. So now we're going to set this value to 60, and this is going to be minutes or seconds, whatever. If you wanted to base it on real time, we could do seconds here. But in our game, we want every second to equal 1 minute because we want time to move faster. So it'll only take roughly 24 minutes to do an entire day and night cycle. So now in our system, because we copy this directly over, we need to now check for, we want to add hours. Because now every time we reach 60 minutes, we want to add an hour. And then we want to modulate our minutes to, minutes to the value of minutes, not ticks this time. And we want to make sure that we set this to 60 because that's the value here. And in our example, to make it go really fast, like we had done in the preview before we started coding this, this was set to 2. And I'll show you the difference, of course, here in a second. But we want to copy and paste this one more time. And we want to do this with hours. So now our hours, well, there's only 24 hours in a day. So we know if we're working on a 24-hour clock rather than a 12-hour clock, we have a total of 24 hours. So now, whenever our hours reaches 24, we want to add 1 to our day count. And we want to go down here and change hours to modulate to hours and the number of hours, the maximum of 24. And when we run this, now we would see that once we hit 60, roughly 1 minute of real life time, we will then get 1 hour in our game. And we can test that, again, by changing this to 2, changing this to 2. And now we can see that every tick we get, every 2, we get 1 hour. So that's great. So we have once this reaches 24, we should get a day count. So we'll wait for that to happen. And there we go. So we validated that it works. Well, that's excellent. Now we have a time system, and now we can keep track of that time. The next thing that we want to do is create another one of these event groups, drag it underneath, and we're going to say creating day and night. We're going to add a new condition, Shift D, once we have it selected. And if you accidentally create it out of it, you just got to drag it back in. No big deal. We want to do at the beginning of the scene, so we can just copy this one. If we can right click it and copy this, but if you select this at the beginning of the scene, Control C, we can either click paste conditions or click back on it, Control V. Well, actually that didn't work. We'll just click paste conditions. There we go. Ta-da. And now what we want to do is we're going to create a Boolean. Now, I'm not going to go back into here and create a Boolean into our variables because I want to show you that it does work without needing to do that. So we're going to create it on the fly. And so we're going to add a scene bool. So change a Boolean value. We want to call this sunrise. And we're going to set sunrise to false. We're going to copy and paste this. And we're going to set it to sunset. I'm going to set that to false. So every time we load our map, they're both set to false. Now, because we keep track of time, we can actually come down here and copy the hours system. And we're going to just paste that in here, drag it underneath, remove these. And now we're going to start with creating nighttime. So what we want to do is go greater than. When the hours are greater than 24, well, that doesn't work because we're saying there isn't more than 24 hours. So we need to minus the maximum number of hours we want it to take for darkness to transition, or is for sunlight to transition into darkness. So in this case, we're going to say 6 hours. So at roughly 1800 hours, or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun will begin to fall. So that's what this time scale is. And we need to remember that because 6 is our duration of time to transition through both day and nighttime, at least in this example. So now what we need to do is during this hour gap period, we want sunset. We can copy both of these and paste them in here. Now we want our sunset to equal to true and our sunrise to false, because whenever this happens in that time scale, we want that to happen. We're going to copy and paste this again. And now what we're going to do is say when we are less than 6 hours, because we start our clock at 0 and go 0, 100 hours to 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And what we're going to end up doing here is going from 0 to 6. So in the first 6 hours of daytime, we want to turn, and we can just flop these around. I'll move them like that and turn this one to false and this one to true. Now we have a toggle happening. We wouldn't be able to see that happen in our code if we ran it right now. We could check these values in our debug, and you could do that if you'd like to. However, it's not going to be necessary. We then, again, at the top, Shift D, oops, I clicked on the wrong thing. We want another condition, which has no condition added. And we want to change the opacity of daylight to 0. So at the beginning, we check if the hours are between this, do this. If the hours are between this, do this. Otherwise, do this. So this is like an else if statement. Okay. Now we're almost done here. This is what's pretty cool. So what we're going to say is that daylight is 0. That's all we're saying here. Daylight needs to be 0. 0 is no darkness. Absolute no black. So now that we've said that we're at maximum brightness when we're not during this time frame, which is our default lighting, we can now add a check. So we can add a new event, add the condition. We want to check if a scene variable, so scene variable, and we need to check the Boolean variable of the scene. If sunset is equal to true, we want to do something. And we're going to paste this, copy and paste it, and set sunset to sunrise. It's important that we make sure that all the capitals are the same, because how we name stuff will matter. And now we need to decide what happens when these are true. So in the sunset, we're going to start with sunset. We need to change the opacity of daylight at a scaling factor. And we can do this by doing something called lerp. Lerp takes two values and moves between those values by a degree of X number. So let's say A, B, and X. A would be the beginning value. B would be the value we want to move to. X would be at how quickly we transition to that number. So by setting a lerp, we can say 200, which is the max darkness of, we want to go from darkness, or from our value of sunset. So we're saying from darkness to 0. We're going to do it at a scale of 24. So our third number, so we need to do 200, 0, because that's daylight. And then we need to say, and we need to do close brackets because we need this mathematically to happen at a different point. So we need to make sure we close this in and say 24 minus, so 24s are the maximum amount of daytime we have, minus the variable of hours. So variables, scene variable, hours. And we need to divide all of that by 6. And 6 is because that's the duration. So this could be, if we were coding this in a different way, maybe time duration. But we don't have that value set, so we're using 6 because we set it technically here. So that is the first transition. And we can clean this up a little bit so you guys can see a little bit better what's going on here. Let me add some spaces. So here we can see inside of our alert, we have 200, 0, and then inside of another section, 24 minus, so max hours minus the current hour divided by 6, because that's a transition. So now that we have a nice alert, we want to copy that, paste it here. Now, when we go to sunrise, the math is just a little bit different. And the only difference is we don't need to minus from 24 because we're not going, the sun is rising, not setting. So we can remove that and remove the brackets that was around that. So now it just looks like this. lerp 200 to 0 at a variable of hours divided by 6. And now we can run this. And now we have a transition between daytime. So 6 is our brightest time. And now once we hit the 18, might be hard to see, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Now it's black, back to daylight. And now we have a day-night counting system. And that, my friends, is how you make a day and night system like a boss.
Hey, listen. It's dangerous out there alone, so take this into consideration. Like, comment, and subscribe. By the way, you've leveled up.